Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce the moderator of this panel, Mr. Bruno Lanvin. Bruno is known to many of you. To recall briefly, Bruno once worked for UNCTAD here in Geneva, but he also once worked for the World Bank in a very prominent position, and he is the executive director of the eLab at INSEAD, and I would say a very important thought leader in economics, in the economics of development in particular, economics of innovation. Bruno, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Francis. Hello, everybody. So as could be expected in this type of meetings, we're sliding a little bit. I'm turning to actually the organizers to know how much flexibility we have vis-a-vis the time of the lunch. Can anybody tell me when we have actually to stop this session?
Or maybe it's better to ask how hungry you are.
Okay, 45 minutes. The theme of the policy panel is innovation for expanding the frontiers of growth and development. And since Francis Gurry referred to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle this morning, let me refer to another great thinker about innovation, who is Woody Allen. Woody Allen said, if you're not failing from time to time, you're probably not doing something very innovative. And I strongly believe that this is the case. And this is an opportunity for me to pay tribute to Francis Gurry's leadership and to WIPO for accepting to be associated with us in this venture this year, because from the start, when we started, it could have been seen, and it was seen as a quite risky adventure. Ranking countries, getting into the depth of things that have not been measured before. So this is my opportunity to pay tribute to that leadership. The idea of looking at whether innovation indeed pushes the frontiers of growth and development is equivalent to asking whether innovation can be a game changer. And if it is a game changer, who is standing to gain and to lose? Or are we all going to gain, and if so, under which conditions? The questions that stem from that include what challenges and opportunities face different countries at different levels of development, given the components of innovation, which do not include just patents, licenses, research and development, but innovation in business models, in social models, and all the aspects that have been discussed already. At the same time, the purpose of this panel is also to identify avenues for action. The GII report is not an academic report. It is meant to be a tool for action. How can countries, how can organizations improve in the area of innovation? And this is largely the question that is being asked to our panel, which represents an exceptional combination of talents and origins and experiences and profiles. So I will not get into describing the career and milestones in the lives of our 5 panelists. Let me just mention their names, starting with Daniele Archibugi. Immediately on my right. Daniele is the technology director of the Italian National Research Council and also a professor in innovation at the University of London. Next to Daniele, we have Leonid Gogberg, who is the first vice rector of the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, and also has other responsibilities regarding innovation, and I shall mention that later on. To Leonid's right, we have Rolf Dieter Hoyer, the Director General of CERN here in Geneva. And then we have, Francis Gurry, you've heard before, so I'm not introducing Francis. Lynn Saint-Amour, who is the president, CEO of ISOC, the Internet Society. And next to Lynn on her right, we have Naushad Forbes, from Forbes Marshall Incorporated, the head, but also the chairman of the Innovation Council of the Confederation of Indian Industries, who has been accompanying us on this GII endeavor since its creation. The process of the panel is the following. I will turn to the panelists, and Francis has accepted to play the role of the wild card. That is, anybody who is anybody who mentions anything can be challenged by Francis. Basically, that's the idea. And if we get very confused or very complex or technical at any point in time, we count on Francis to help us move from the problem to the solution. So let me first turn to each of the panelists in turn, just so that you can hear the sound of their voices, and they will tell us in 1 minute or less what is at the top of their mind when they look at this innovation as a potential game changer. And then I will turn to each of them in turn, asking them a more precise question relating to their areas of competence and interest. So let me start with Daniele.
Well, I mean, innovation as a core of my intellectual activity, and I see innovation as both a race among companies and among countries, but also as a cooperative venture, in which some countries need to learn, some firms need to learn, some people need to learn, and they need to learn from each other. And therefore, I think this is a very important process, and I will argue later on that better measures of innovation helps us to understand who is lagging behind, who is ahead, and how we can, if you like, bridge these gaps.
Yeah, first of all, we welcome NCI involvement in this project. And I hope also later on we'll be able to get into the question that was asked earlier on India's specific ranking, if we want to. We welcome particularly the attempt to be inclusive in metrics of innovation. I do believe that a metric like R&D is a percentage of GDP, which is the standard metric that's been used for many, many years, reflects a very narrow focus on measuring innovation. And if you look at that metric for India, for example, over the last 20 years, it hasn't changed. It's varied between 0.7 and 0.9% of GDP, which would say that nothing has changed with regard to innovation in India in 20 years, which is patently wrong for anyone who has an even limited contact with the country. So one needs to go further. One needs to identify which specific areas one needs to focus on, where the gaps are, as Daniela said, and that's what these metrics can very powerfully do. Now, I have to say that I have a concern about going from, say, 1 or 2 or 3 metrics, though, to 80 metrics. Because if we have 80 metrics, then my concern is whether or not a composite index covering 80 metrics, how sensitive is that index at the end of the day to particular not weightages, but to the simple average? You know, that is one averaging out important and key elements with less important and perhaps non-differentiating elements.
Thank you, Naushad. Leonid.
Yes, thank you, Bruno. First, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this panel and to the International Advisory Board. I do see the GII as a very important tool to assist national governments in identifying bottlenecks in the national innovation systems, but also to identify best international practices to be adopted at the national level. My interest to GI is basically twofold. First, my team at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, which is the national research university involved in economics and social sciences, is in charge of developing all the methodologies for national statistics on S&T innovation and the information society. But also more recently, we have been invited by the Russian government to initiate a discussion on a new socio-economic strategy for my country for the next decade. So there were several working groups established for specific policy areas, and I was invited to chair the one for innovation policy. So this is at the core of our activity for the time being. And the key point is that we propose to the government to consider innovation as the major source of economic growth and social progress. But innovation should be taken in a broad sense, including its non-technological, social, and environmental dimensions. And this, in our view, will allow to overcome the major challenge for the Russian economy for the next decade, which we define as a disbalance between an unstable model of integration into the global economy due to the prevailing raw materials export orientation, and on the other hand, relative high level of development and very high educational attainment level of the population. So definitely we will follow this work and look at the opportunities raised by GII for the implementation at the international and national level. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm turning now to Rolf-Dieter Hoyer from CERN.
Thank you, and I want to just follow up the key result number 5, which was a question of difficulty to measure innovation. I think the problem starts earlier. The question is how to define innovation in a broader sense, and I agree with my neighbor here. And I think certainly it's a gap between the problem, bridging the gap between the problem and the solution. We should not only be economical driven, it's a gap between the problem and the solution, and it is not an incremental change. I think innovation is a substantial change, and this we should keep in mind. This is innovation. And this is also where, to my mind, fundamental science, basic research comes into play. And this is one thing I would like to take up later. This is a little bit missing in this innovation index, and I think there we could improve. And the other point which is missing is the knowledge. The knowledge which is at the moment in the innovation index is very much geared towards patents and etc. And I think, again, this is to my mind wrong. So since I have only 1 minute, I brought a brochure which we just recently published, which has a title, Particle Physics as a Key Driver of Innovation, and whoever is interested can pick up afterwards 1 copy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rolf. Let me now turn to Lynn Santamore, and first to thank Lynn, first for helping us move closer to gender balance on our panels, and also to remind us that since we talk about problem and solution, French, which we are not using today in this meeting, is one of the few languages in which the problem is masculine and solution is feminine. If it's of any indication, please, Lynn.
I guess I should be flattered that 1 of me equals 5 or 6 of you. No, so I want to thank WIPO and INSEAD for this index and for this conference as well. I actually have 2 things on my mind. I'll cover them both very, very quickly. One is that we can't take the internet for granted, and we all need to work to ensure that it remains open, globally addressable. That's why the deployment of IPv6 is so important, because that's what facilitates what we call permissionless innovation. That allows any individual, it can be a company or an organization or an individual, to define or develop a solution to their particular need. Not always a problem, sometimes just a need or a like to have. And as we've all seen in recent events, some elements of that are coming under threat, and we can't take it for granted. We really must be vigilant and ensure that we protect all the things that have actually given us the internet to date. I guess the second quick thing I would ask for is, Bruno, you actually talked about innovation in, I think you said cultural and social and economic. I'd also like to look for innovation in our governance and policy activities as well. The multi-stakeholder model and openness and open participation is what gave us the internet and all of its value, and we need to find a way to embed a lot of those principles and that multi-stakeholder environment in our policy and governance activities today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Now, going back to some of the points that each of you raised, And since we're starting with Daniele, I'm turning to you again, Daniele. You come from the academic side, and we know that in academia we like to measure everything, especially the non-measurable. There's always somebody who tries to imagine a way to measure happiness, and this is a very serious issue in which prominent economists like Stiglitz are being involved. So it's something which 20 years ago would have maybe sounded like a dream, which people are taking very seriously now. What, in your view, is the main reason, if any, why this kind of measurement should be done at national level? We could imagine to do it at corporate level, organizational level. What is your view on doing it at the national level?
Well, I mean, the process of generating competencies and knowledge is not an individual process. It's a process which is based in institutions. It's based, and within these institutions, nations are also very important. A few days ago, I was on the other side of Switzerland, on the Lake of Constance, and I was told that the German spoken on the Swiss side was totally different from the German spoken on the other side, the German side of the same lake. And how come, you know? And I mean, this at least was what the German border police said. If that is true, it means that institutions shape even an important factor as the language that people speak. Why? Because in schools you will get national teachers, because maybe if you live on one side you will listen to certain TV channels. The same somehow apply for innovation. It's not an isolated event, it's an event which is rooted in national institutions. And therefore I very much welcome the approaches, including this one, which do not take into account just one single metrics of innovation, but like to look at the much broader perspectives. And this can be somehow an antagonistic process. I mean, you see the press release just distributed and says Switzerland is first. It looks like Switzerland has won the World Championship of Innovation, which might be the case, but behind that, for somebody who is a scholar like me, there is a much more interesting approach. And the approach is to say, what are the conditions which make some countries behave better than others? And how can other countries learn from each other? And indeed, if you take into account these sort of things, you really see that, as our host rightly said before, that innovative capabilities are still highly concentrated in a selected number of countries. But still, there are new entrants. And these new entrants might arrive for a variety of channels which are not necessarily the traditional ones. Also, the traditional ones are important, because if you look at the emerging countries such as India, such as China, and so on, you see that they are not just producing films. For example, India is a major new entrant into the film industry, but they're also performing R&D. They're also starting to patent more, and also in the developed economies. So there is a change in the geography, and this change is also perceived by a variety of measures. And I think it's very important for the business sector, for policymakers, and also for scholars to identify all these factors. And I would say that something more can be done on the basis of these factors. For example, we would like to have better economic performance and also better social progress. I do not expect that all the countries of the world will respond equally well to some increase in inputs, you know? It's not just by making everybody in a developing country holding a PhD that you increase the performance of this country. Perhaps some of these countries will need other things. They will need maybe basic infrastructures, electricity, water, internet, and so on. And you will find out that some of these developing countries are much faster in catching up in these sort of indicators. One typical case is the internet, which, you know, you really see that there has been a diffusion where there has been leapfrogging. And some developing countries where, I mean, sometimes internet has arrived before the telephone. You know, because the telephone, or at least fixed telephones, would require an infrastructure, while mobile telephones would require less of infrastructure, and therefore this leapfrogging can be also very important in order to secure economic development. And therefore, my next step, and Bruno, I will finish with that because we are short of time, the next step is to explore more systematically this battery of indicators in order to single out which factors will allow to improve the economic performance of each individual countries. And we managed to develop a typology of that. I see that the room is full of policy advisors and policy makers, and we know that we have got colleagues in the World Trade Organization which are struggling on a daily basis for intellectual property rights, for example. We are hosted here by one of the most ancient international organizations in the field of intellectual property. We will find out that, as usual, some countries much very strict in order to protect their knowledge. Other countries might be a more flexible system of intellectual property. Our Japanese colleague yesterday complained, not yesterday, just 1 hour before at the press conference, complained because he said that China is acquiring without paying a due course its own technology for railways. I've been last month in the very fast train from Shanghai airport to Shanghai, 7 minutes, 430 kilometers speed, so very fast train. The same argument I heard them before when the United States were complaining against Japan because they assumed that Japan was stealing the American technology without paying a due price. So history repeats itself, but let's hope that it will continue to do so also in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniele, and thank you for bringing passion into this. I can tell you that I'm just back from Brussels. We had a meeting yesterday on the state of the European Union, and the point was made exactly about fast train in China. And people were saying 5 years ago we were competing to know whether Alstom or Siemens would get the market, and now we're looking at what the Chinese are doing, and it is better, it is faster, it's more comfortable than what we can either produce from Alstom or Siemens. And that came from the industry. In the points just raised by Daniele, he was clearly looking at you, Danshad, for the and I know you were burning your leash to talk about the specific situation of India. Now, of course, we are here on the, we've been working with a number of international organizations, UN organizations, so the development dimension is absolutely key in trying to build such an index. So it would be of use to emerging economies and developing countries. Now, you mentioned some very fascinating figures just a minute ago, saying that the ratio of R&D spending to GDP in India had not changed, if I understood well, for 30 years, remaining between 0.7% and 0.9%. This is a striking figure. How do you interpret that?
Well, it actually reflects where R&D spending is done in India and how and what is actually measured. The R&D spending, the 0.7, 0.9% number has indeed been there for the last 30 years. It's come down a bit to 0.7% when GDP growth was faster, and it's gone up to 0.9 when GDP growth was slower, which actually says that R&D spending has grown at a fairly level way, and GDP growth has varied somewhat. But beyond that, there are a few things that are left out. For example, all the R&D that is done as contract research in India, which is about the same as the total R&D spending that is financed in India, so done by international companies developing products in India. None of that actually shows up in the official R&D statistics. If you actually throw that in, then you double the percentage of GDP that you would get for R&D spending. Now, is that right? Because that R&D spending does not actually contribute to Indian economic performance except in a very narrow way. It doesn't contribute, that's not the production of knowledge that is being used and diffused in India. But it's an issue of how you measure it. I think more important than that, if you look at the metric overall and for development, I mean, one of the key metrics has got to be new products and processes, and the introduction of new products and processes. That has to be one of the key outputs of any innovation system. How do we measure that? Because today there is no measure for new products and processes. There is patents that we use, but as we know, a very small proportion of total patents are actually worked. We know also that patents have problems in that they are important in certain industries, and therefore they are a subject of industrial structure in a country and are not structure agnostic. Patents have various problems. They are a limited indicator of new product innovations, and they are an almost non-existent indicator of new service and new business model innovations. So how do we actually get some take on new products and new services and new business models that are coming to bear in a country? Because that's going to be absolutely critical if we want to get a better idea of how innovation is happening in developing countries. I'm talking generally, but if you talk more specifically about India, you look on the ground at the diffusion of mobile telephones. Where does that show up in the metrics? How should that show? The fact that we now have 700 million mobile connections growing at whatever, 20 million a month, that should show somewhere. Where should it? It should have, because it's, if you ask me, it's an input metric for an innovation system in terms of enabling communication between people. Where does new business model innovations in health delivery show up that enables a larger population to get cataract operations at a very low cost or get limbs replaced at a very low cost? These are the kinds of things that do not show in ready-made statistics, but we need to get some hold of them, it seems to me, if we are going to capture innovation effectively in a developing environment. A last quick comment, which is, I think when we're looking at innovation statistics, both position is important and movement is important. So we need metrics that both measure relative position, and we need metrics that measure movement, not in position, but movement in itself, growth, in other words. And so one needs some combination, it seems to me, of relative position metrics and growth metrics to get a more powerful indication of what's happening on the ground. And I think that's particularly vital. I mean, the key way in which innovation must show up in any economy, it seems to me, is in overall growth. Growth at the national level, growth at a per capita level, growth at the industrial productivity and industrial output level, if you look at value added in industry. And I'd like to see a much higher weightage placed on overall growth rates, because if you look at the Indian performance and you look at India's economic growth from 1947 to 1991, and then you look at economic growth from 1991 to 2011, you see a complete inflection point in the growth rate. You see the same thing in China. And that inflection point in the growth rate is a reflection of innovation and technology capability being put to work in the economy. So I think our metrics should reflect that, and there should be a one-to-one correlation, really, between growth in the economy as it shows up in overall per capita growth, as it shows up in industrial growth, as it shows up in value-added growth, and the actual metrics that we're measuring on the ground of new products, processes, business models that are coming out.
Thank you very much, Naushad, and opening a number of issues indeed. Clearly, and I will not get into what composite indexes are good for and sometimes bad for, but clearly identifying those elements that could have the biggest impact on growth is absolutely key. This is what we've seen in the work we've done on other indices with the World Economic Forum in particular. That comes as a second stage. That is what we call the sensitivity analysis. But it's very important to have this kind of signal to know where to look and where to trigger action. So thank you very much for this. And I now turn to Leonid because clearly Russia, okay, another very large economy, another brick. And also a country in which innovation has become a key word. That is what we've heard over the last few months and years, both from the President and the Prime Minister, is that innovation is a key leading concept to transform the Russian economy in the next 10 to 20 years. And as you mentioned before, Leonid, you are having very central responsibilities in that effort. What is the view from Russia about what should be done in that area to indeed translate innovation in terms of high levels of competitiveness, growth, and well-being?
Yes, so as I mentioned, we have this expert group recently established for debating and proposing a new model for the innovation policy for the next decade. This is actually a very tough exercise with a very strict deadlines and very difficult discussions with very different points of view represented there. We have been proposing several major issues to consider as sort of key trade-offs to be really very carefully analyzed for the next wave of innovation policy. So first, we suggest to reconsider an approach of sort of high technology myopia towards much greater emphasis on non-technological innovation, on innovation in low-tech industries and the services sector, which in many cases have been already even more advanced in terms of knowledge intensity than traditional high-tech industries. Definitely a favorable institutional framework for innovation in order to increase the competition and establish favorable conditions for innovating companies. But also what we stress is establishing unfavorable conditions for non-innovators and leveling gaps in sectoral profitabilities between the raw material industries and the manufacturing. Also redistribution of policy recommendation or policy responsibilities from the central government towards regional authorities, business associations, and institutions for development. Also, it has been clear, not only for my country, but also for many countries, and I'm engaged in different international discussions, that there is no longer room for, I would say, universal innovation policies across all sectors. So we suggest a design of differentiated policy mixes for specific industries, but also for specific types of innovating companies, ranging from imitators or technology adopters to local and global innovators. Also, shift from traditional technology markets towards more emphasizing emerging and fast-growing future technological markets like biotech or advanced materials or individual pharmaceuticals, green technology. Also to pay specific attention towards the we call it functional priorities rather than thematic priorities, like engineering and design networking, technology transfer activities, cluster policies, training. We also suggest to really strongly reform the public R&D sector, which to a great deal still adheres to the, I would say, Soviet-style institutional model where universities and industrial companies are more or less disintegrated with research institutions. Also, inclusive innovation is another major issue, but not only in the traditional sense like in many developing countries, but also the specific case for Russia is the so-called monoproduct industrial settlements. Definitely one of the key issues is stimulating the creative class and entrepreneurship. So if we come back to the Global Innovation Index, we may see that most of these areas are reflected by the indicators suggested in this product. I would like also to refer briefly to a discussion about the methodologies. So definitely the methodological layer is a very specific academic exercise, more academic than the policy relevant analysis. So I would say that I'm not always in agreement for some specific methodological solutions suggested in the index, but this is, I think, rather normal, and furthermore, I would say that it would be abnormal if everybody agrees with the methodologies. It is very difficult, actually, to measure all these issues, and I think this is the most ambitious project worldwide in this particular area, really attempting to cover to have a much broader vision of innovation and innovation related broader environment and conditions. I can give you just briefly, just two examples of how sophisticated and complex is this issue. I'm a member of the OECD working group of national experts for S&T indicators. And we had a very strong discussion for several years with respect to a revision of the Oslo manual, which was already mentioned there. And just two hints for the definition, for the final definition of innovation, which is now in the Oslo manual as a core of the guidelines to measure innovation. First, we agreed that there should not be any notion of technology in the very definition of innovation, because technology is understood very differently in different languages and different academic traditions. And secondly, last week we had another meeting. One of the topics we discussed there was results of the cognitive testing of the definition of technology across Europe and several other countries. So even the simple words which we have in the definition, like significantly improved products and services, have been tested in a very controversial manner in different countries. So there is already a discussion how the definition should be then amended, not saying anything about further subsequent issues, how to measure various aspects of innovation. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leonid. Let me turn now to Rolf-Dieter Heuer. There's a probability that in this very room we are probably standing on the top of a certain tunnel somewhere, or not very far. They are more on the French side, on the Swiss side. We heard from Naushad about India. India is one of the countries that has selected as their president famous scientists in the past. What you see as the relationship or lack of relationship, you seem to hint in your rather strongly in your first intervention of the fact that fundamental research is not perceived as importantly as it should in generating innovation. Would you like to give us more information on that?
Yeah, first of all, there's no danger standing here on the tunnel. It's 100 meters below, and the only danger is to the tunnel and not to you. Yeah, I mentioned that I think everybody sees innovation as a substantial step forward and not an incremental step forward. And this gives me the occasion to give one, to my mind, striking example of such a thing, where it was, I agree, I might be the problem and not the solution to it, which was not measurable at that point, and that was the invention of the World Wide Web. And that invention was here. The World Wide Web was born here at CERN in Geneva. And it was not patented at the time. So I think the world would look different if it would have been patented. But your innovation index only looks at patents. So I think one has to change something here. But one needs foresight in order to foresee something like this. But my challenge is to find some indicators for such possible breakthroughs. And these breakthroughs, they come from the substantial steps one makes forward. And the substantial steps forward are not only in applied science, they are also, and to a large extent, in basic science. And let me give you another, to my very simple example. You can do really incremental steps forward by tremendous research on the candle. But this will not give you a substantial step forward to the light bulb. For this, you need some new basic research, which then on electricity in that case, which afterwards turns electricity into something usable through the applied research. So we have to find measures on that, indicators on that, and this is what I'm missing in the 80 indicators to some extent. You are too much on the applied side, okay, but we can discuss this privately also. There's another thing which I'm missing to some extent is on the knowledge, because you were talking also beforehand on the developing countries. Now, for the developing countries, I think one of the most important aspects is the knowledge, education and knowledge. Now, how to measure this? There's a lot on education and knowledge but it, again, to my mind, not enough. You need to find indicators. For example, what I'm missing is how much is spent into the education of teachers, for example. Yeah, I mean, there's something on education, expenditure, etc. But what is important, it's the education of the teachers, because they are the multipliers. Yeah, so indicators like this, I think, are very, very important. So the investment in that type of education, I think, is very, very important. So.
Thank you very much. And let me now turn to the other five of you. Lynn, we've heard a lot about patents, about licenses, about protecting intellectual property, which to some extent may sound fairly defensive when you come from the internet world, which is all about open standards, openness, exchanges. We just heard from CERN how the World Wide Web has been born here, etc., has not been patented, maybe was not patentable at the time. How do you see that as a contradiction, as something that needs to be reconciled, or what are your views on how innovation, the World Wide Web, the internet can be better combined in the future?
I think balance in all these things is key. I mean, the web is probably the most important application that's been developed on top of the internet. And frankly, if it was patented at the time and that actually limited development, the internet community would have routed around it. There would have been a World Wide Web Prime or something else that actually would have facilitated. At the internet's development, the heart of the internet's development, it was user-centric. It was that users get to determine what they read, what they access, what they need, and their ability to develop and deploy solutions to those needs is really what is it really at the heart of the internet's development. You can call it user-centric internet, which we have in the past. You can say that it facilitates permissionless innovation. At the end of the day, it's allowing users to have maximum choice with respect to what they access, what they deploy, what they use, how they solve their own problems. So I think, again, if it was patented, the internet community would have found a way to route around it. One of the other important things is in that model is that as individuals, we don't need to wait for some central authority or some hierarchical authority to determine what the solution will be, what services or products will be delivered, when or how they will be deployed, or how they will be priced. And that is certainly threatening to a lot of current business models, but I don't think it needs to be. In a recent McKinsey report actually showed that the internet drove 21% of GDP growth, and a significant piece of that growth actually came out of traditional industries. Maybe as one other quick example of innovation, Twitter. And we can all agree or disagree on how useful Twitter is. But at the end of the day, 140 characters, when that first came out, people said, what can be done with this? But hashtags, which allows you to track topics and threads, was actually developed by users, not by the Twitter founders, not by the Twitter company organization, by users. The same thing with implementing URLs. So their platform was just open enough that it allowed people to facilitate, which drove value into their product, and ultimately value for them as an organization, a company. I think there's a lot of other, Facebook, Google, the web, and applications on the web are other examples of being open enough, sometimes just open enough, to actually facilitate value being developed and built into your products. And I think the hardest thing is to actually lean into openness and lean into sharing across product development, across policy circles. One of the other things that, if you read some of the early internet papers, one of the other notions was you share one idea, you get many in return. And I think that's something that has continued to carry through in terms of the internet kind of culture, if you will.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Due to our constraint on time, and because I want to leave the last word to Francis Gurry, let me just try to, not to try and summarize what has been a very rich set of presentations and points here, but maybe to highlight a few that struck me most, and I'm totally biased about that. We've heard from the specific experience of two major economies, India and Russia. We've heard the points of views from global, regional organizations and from an academic points of view, academic points of views as well, and several keywords emerge from that. I think the first word that emerged is that innovation is about sharing. We've heard it in different tones and variations, but clearly no innovation can be today conceived or imagined as coming from one specific brain or even one specific lab. Cooperation, collaboration has become key in that area, and CERN is, of course, a very significant incarnation of that. The second word, which has been pronounced in different guises on this panel, is that of openness. Clearly, from the point of view of internet society, it's a keyword, it's the keyword, but reference has been made also to the experience of India and this inflection point. If we looked at the trade policy of India and when the economy became more open, there's probably a very strong coincidence. So it's not just openness of brains, it's openness of borders, it's openness to different cultures, different ways of doing things, to imagine what could be different. The fourth key sentence or keyword was that of the fact that, and this has been mentioned by Sumitra Dutta earlier in his presentation of the index, this is not the ultimate index. It is a tool for action. It is a tool that is there to be improved, and the way to improve it is through dialogue. It's through discussions like that, saying, this is good, this could be better, this is bad, this needs to be added. So we, of course, count very much on your further inputs, discussions, feedback to improve on this work. Also, a key word that has been pointed at is growth, improvement, doing things differently. Clearly, the sensitivity analysis, what can be built on an index like that, is absolutely key. Because, as I mentioned before, it's not an academic exercise, it's not a report to put on the shelf. If it is not used to improve the situation of countries, economies, people, and corporations, it is not what it should be. And last but not least, and I think all of you mentioned it, innovation is not about technology. It's not about industry. It's not even about countries. It's about people. It's about improving the lives of people. It's about enabling people to do their best and be their best. Gray matter is by far the commodities which is the most evenly distributed on the surface of this planet. So innovation is clearly the way in which everybody can be, every individual can be given this opportunity to show what they can do, to translate it into an improvement of their respective lives and those who are around them. So thank you very much for that. As promised, I turn to our wild card, the Director General of WIPO, Francis. Any additional word of wisdom for us, please?
Thank you very much, Bruno. Thank you very much, Bruno. After that summary, I think it's wonderful summary. Let me just make one comment, if I may, because Rolf Dieter has I'll exercise my wild card against Rolf Dieter. I don't at all disagree with his point about the placing far more emphasis in the index on basic science. In fact, I think it's an indispensable thing to be doing, and it is the source of substantive innovation. But let me just remind you, if I may, that intellectual property is a very flexible instrument. It's a very flexible instrument. So, for example, had the World Wide Web been able to be patented, and I think that's a question in itself, perhaps the amount of investment that has gone into or would be able to go into basic science would be different. So if you had found a very flexible licensing model in which the burden for the innovation of the World Wide Web had been shared across the whole user community in a very fair and reasonable manner and with a modest contribution for everyone for this wonderful innovation, it would have enabled an enormous investment in turn in further basic research. And that is the sort of flexibility that is built into the intellectual property system. It is not a rigid system. It can be used in a vast variety of manners in which to encourage innovation. And indeed, one of its other roles is the sharing of knowledge, because it has put together the most accessible and systematic record of humanity's technology. And the example I like to use is of the saxophone, which is the only instrument in the classical orchestra that has ever been patented, and it was patented in 1842 by Adolf Sax. And over the ensuing period of 30 or 40 years, a number of improvements were indeed patented to the sax by Adolf Sax himself, but by a number of other inventors, improvements in the mouthpiece. We ended up with a much better saxophone, which fell into the public domain over 100 years ago as a piece of technology. And you can contrast that, of course, with the violin, where nobody knows how the violins of Cremona in the 18th century were made, because the secret was lost, as it was passed in secrecy from family to family and not disclosed. So, yes, I agree with Lynn. The first version of the World Wide Web would have perhaps been routed around, as you say, or invented around, but that's part of the purpose of the patent system, is to disclose the knowledge and enable others to build upon that knowledge. Thank you.